Hello, beautiful visionaries. I'm your host, Lorna Liana, and today I'm really excited to bring to you Cameron Wenaus, the CEO and co-founder of Retreat Guru, an online retreat marketplace. Well, a marketplace for retreats both online and offline. He is passionate about the intersection of work and spirituality, as he's been a practitioner of Buddhism for over 20 years, and Cameron currently lives in a small mountain town in British Columbia. Today, we're going to talk about emerging trends in the psychedelic retreat industry, and we're just going to hear about the growth of plant medicines around the world and the increased interest in people offering and people seeking transformational ceremonial retreat experiences with psychedelics, especially psychedelic plants and fungi. Thank you so much for joining us today, Cameron.
Oh, you're welcome. It's nice to be connected.
So I'd love to hear your personal story about how you ended up in this vocation as being the creator of one of the world's leading marketplaces for transformational and especially transformational psychedelic retreats.
Complete accident.
You were recruited by ayahuasca, weren't you?
No, I wasn't. That's actually, I might be one of the few people that says I wasn't recruited by ayahuasca. I started doing web development and meditation at the same time in the late 90s. And my brother as well, who's the co-founder of the company. And we were building websites we were doing a lot of meditation and meditating at retreat centers and building websites for the retreat centers that we were at. So we ended up being kind of like the go-to web dev shop for Tibetan lamas. And we did that for years, like about a decade. And then my brother got interested in ayahuasca in the early 2000s and went down to Peru, and he did about 60 ceremonies in a very short span of time. Came back a different person. I started working with ayahuasca, and I started seeing the connection between ayahuasca and Buddhism. And then I started also dabbling into yoga a little bit, and it dawned on me, one day we were just sort of like, we had been working and building tech for retreat centers for such a long time, but it dawned on me, like, there's no one place where you can find all retreats in the world: yoga, meditation, ayahuasca, San Pedro, psychedelics. It's like, it didn't exist. So we said, let's build it. And it was almost at a moment of frustration, because I went to my yoga teacher and I said, hey, I want to do a retreat, but I know enough about Buddhism that, like, I'm not just going to go do a retreat with anybody. Who's your teacher? And she never got back to me. And I was frustrated by that. I'm like, why? So I ended up not doing a yoga retreat. And I was like, why isn't there just a place where I could just go and read reviews and find and put in the dates? Like, here's my budget and here's the dates. And so we ended up building it.
Yeah. I think, I'm so glad that you have this entrepreneurial mindset, which is like, well, it doesn't exist, so we'll build it. We've got a problem. No one's fixed the problem, so we'll fix it. So that's really, I really appreciate that spirit. And I also understand too, as an online entrepreneur as well, who deals with technology, that a number of different challenges can come up when you are creating a technology-based solution. And so I'm genuinely curious to know, how do you guys address situations like that? So you've got this marketplace, and people can browse the kind of retreat that they want, and, by location, by the type of retreat. They could even look for specific teachers. And then you've got this rating system, and I'm sure, a user based and all of that. And one of the things that I learned when I was, working in high tech, we worked for Salesforce.com in a previous life, and they created the software that was kind of like a dig.com type of voting mechanism that was then used to power, one of the White House, government sites where they would poll people on, what the most important issue would be, so that they could, focus on it, and make an agenda of their administration. And so, one of the things that we became aware of is that these kinds of things can be gamed, right? And so with retreats, and especially with psychedelic retreat safety being a hot topic, how do you address that concern around people being able to game your system, and how do you build in mechanisms of trust in your marketplace?
Such a good question. Yeah, things can be gamed, and we've actually seen people try to game our site. We noticed similar. That was fascinating. We saw one center who was putting in, who's no longer on our site now, but it was putting in all these reviews were coming in, but same exact same IP address, and such similar Google addresses. So we had a conversation with them and said, this isn't cool. And, they denied it. But nonetheless, they're not on the site anymore. We took them off the site. And, that's just the reality of things. Like you offer a service like reviews, and people try to find the weak point. And it's this ongoing thing. I think our reviews are really nascent stages. Like, right now, we've got some reviews on our site, but we're actually focusing on bringing more reviews from different platforms onto the site as well, so that it's more of a holistic view. Mm-hmm. And we also want to have a lot more richer content, like video content reviews, which aren't much harder to gain because, it's a video of someone there saying, this is my experience. And, you're going to look in their eyes when they're talking and go, okay, that's true, because we can always see bullshit. So we want to include a much more richer experience. At the same time, we always have to be hyper vigilant. There are some bad actors out there, and I would say to anybody using our site or any other review site, it's like, reviews, okay, that's just one data point, but don't make your decision based on that. Like, call up the centers, do Google searches, talk to friends. Any center you call, you should be able to at least talk to the facilitators or talk to some of the people on the phone there and say, could I speak to people who've gone there before? And trust your gut, make sure you're doing your own due diligence, be empowered. I think that's essential when you're choosing a retreat. Reviews are great, one data point.
Yeah, I think that's really important to highlight too, because, you might have, there are some problematic facilitators that have served thousands of people, for example. And, while there might have been a segment of those customers or clients that they've served that have experienced harm from that facilitator, there are also many more that had their very first awakening experience with that psychedelic, which often it's not a really good frame of reference, so to speak. I think when it comes to psychedelics, many people, especially new people, since it's a new experience, they don't necessarily know whether the retreat or the facilitator is any good. It might be the first retreat or the first facilitator, but wow, the ayahuasca was amazing, or wow, the 5-MeO-DMT was amazing. And so, they're coming from that place of like, that was such an incredible meeting with the Godhead that I'm going to give it a 5-star review. And, so it's important to understand that, those reviews, to take them with a grain of salt in a certain aspect, or even just to look at what they wrote, because sometimes it can be really revealing as well, whether the person is a new individual or whether the person is coming from a place of experience and has a real, really valuable critique of that particular center or that facilitator. So reading the content and the review, and then yes, the additional research on the, through Google or through referrals is also really important, and understanding too what your needs are, your own safety tolerance, your own goals that you're trying to achieve through your transformational experience, and how you really need to be cared for, really kind of coming from that place of your own self responsibility and empowerment. But going to your what you see on the underneath the hood of the software as well, I'm always a fan of understanding the story that the data is telling. So I'm curious to know, as a person who is running a marketplace that, through the use of different stakeholders and the retreat creators, the seekers, there's a lot of data points being generated. What are you seeing with regards to the evolution of the psychedelic retreats industry through the story of the big data you have access to?
It's a good question. Well, I mean, I can see some certain trends are happening. Like right now, we just came out of COVID, and we're starting to see COVID bounce back. Retreat centers have their registration levels in the psychedelic space almost back up to what they were pre-COVID. So that I just took a peek into that the other day. It's like, how are we doing? It's like, oh, okay, well. Noticing since COVID, the retreats are running shorter times. Before they were like 8.5-day average, and now they're down to 5-day average. So we've lost about 30% of time. The average price of a psychedelic retreat is around $1,400. It's still a fairly lower price point for a retreat if you were compared to maybe like a yoga retreat or something like that. But often the conditions are a little bit more rustic and more, connected to the earth. I would say overall, one of the bigger trends that I've noticed is the focus on preparation and integration from centers. We're starting to see now that centers focusing on getting students prepared, adequately prepared for this journey well in advance, and focused on, and then integration, holding them in the experience after. This is starting to come up. There's like solo courses that are starting to become more available. Many either centers are running their own, or they're being provided by other partners, which is cool. I'm really happy to see that there's a much more focus on preparation and integration than say like 15 years ago, 10 years ago. Mm-hmm. I think it wasn't a thing, but now we're realizing it's actually the full arc of the healing journey, of the awakening journey. Is you can't just come in, to the bar and have the shot. You have to prep, you have to integrate. As a matter of fact, I would say, personally speaking, integration is like, preparation is important, but integration is like, actually that's the work. Like the work is integration, when you have the insight. So that's I'm starting to see centers offer that more in their packages in preparation and integration, thinking about it holistically, which I'm very happy about. I'm starting to see psilocybin, but maybe 10 years ago, it was like ayahuasca and San Pedro, maybe a little bit iboga. That was the landscape, but now psilocybin and Bufo 5-MeO centers are popping up in Europe and Jamaica and in South America, and so that's new. That feels a little bit more recent, like the past couple of years. Like, oh, interesting. We've got some legal psilocybin centers in Europe, and then in Jamaica as well. So it's I'm happy to see that trend. Also, I'm seeing a couple of centers in the States be a little bit more ambitious and push. They're on their journey to legalization, so that's interesting to see for ayahuasca. So I expect we'll see, as the states decriminalizes marijuana, and then as they get into opening up into other psychedelics, psilocybin and LSD, MDMA, ketamine. Ketamine is now the ketamine clinics and ketamine retreats. Let's kind of less in the retreat space, much more in the clinical setting. We don't have a lot of core competency in the clinical setting. We're really focused on more retreats, but ketamine certainly is taking off. And I expect to see ayahuasca, potentially in Canada, 10 years. I'm just pulling that number out of the air, but nonetheless, you got to visualize these things, right? You have to actually here's where we're going. Yeah.
What is the fastest growing sector that you're seeing?
the fastest growing is psilocybin for sure.
Interesting.
Yeah, ayahuasca, I think, is still much, much, much larger and growing, but psilocybin is the fastest growing.
And even outside of the Netherlands. I mean, so
Oh,
Jamaica, the
absolutely.
Netherlands, right?
Yeah,
Those are the two
Jamaica.
kind of legal places.
Well, and then there's other, I mean, we've got, there's a number of places in the States, like Denver is decrimmed, as well as DC, I believe. There's also in the East Coast, a small town, I forget the name of it right now, it's escaping me, decrimmed psilocybin. It's like, I don't know. So we're starting to see some, like, within the States, some really localized areas decrim. And I think that's just going to, it's kind of what's the same with marijuana. And then I think you're going to just start to see the edges, these little splotches on the edges start to grow.
Wow, that's really fascinating. So when I last visited your site, I was impressed by the number of psychedelics retreats that I'm seeing in places that, where the substances are not legal. And so I'm curious to know what your thoughts are on folks listing their retreats in their psilocybin retreat in a place where psilocybin is still illegal, and the place still hasn't decriminalized. Is that something to be worried about, or is it simply a reflection of the times?
Yeah, right. So we see things through three different lenses. We see things through like white zone, totally legal, gray zone, where countries have not declared, they're open and there's a bit of porousness there, and then they're kind of black zone, which is like, this is completely illegal, like France, Canada, United States, examples of ayahuasca there. It's like, nope, sorry, it's not happening unless there's like church status. And so our policy is on the black side, we just don't allow listings. And the gray zones, we recognize that this is a movement. We need to be part of that. We want to see the psychedelics very slowly and maturely become legalized across the world. And the truth of the matter is, we see our part in that is representing the truth. So if there are those ceremonies that are happening and there are those centers that are standing up and saying, yeah, we're going to do this, we want to support them in that. At the same time, we don't want to push the boundaries too far and have like a Timothy Leary moment where it's like, uh-oh, no, and you have this contraction, right? So it's just this constant dance of like, what's enough to push the boundaries that still represents the truth of the situation? There's also like thousands of underground ceremonies that we can't list. We know this. In my small town here, there's at least 100 a year that happen. So that's an exaggeration, but there's been 100 in the last 5 years at least. And that's, look at New York. You hear that there's like, a ceremony every night in New York or more. I would, I think that we can't represent those really underground circles, but for the countries that are in that kind of gray zone that have established centers that are saying, yeah, okay, we're going to push the boundaries a little bit, we're happy to reflect that. Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a movement, and I think that's important for us to remember. It's a movement. We have to.
Well, that's what's encouraging about it. That's what's encouraging about it because, decriminalization is definitely catching on. It's a bit like the dominoes are falling, right? So I think as the decrim movement starts to really expand, we're absolutely going to be seeing more retreats because the priority is now like drop to the rock bottom. And so, hey, why not just be, more open about it? I think it's a lot better to be transparent too, because then there's a trust mechanism, right? So you have a platform and then you can list your information and anything that might be pertinent. There's an opportunity for participants to, write their feedback. And I personally find that infinitely better than getting the clandestine email and or the clandestine WhatsApp, or now it's Signal or Telegram, and then you don't, and the person's fake name, and like they show up here.
What goes wrong? How do I relate to this? And you know what? In a movement, and I was part of the environmental movement in the early 90s, every place has its part. I used to work for Greenpeace. We were canvassing and spreading the word. But then there was the Sea Shepherds going out ramming ships. And everything had its place in a movement, right? We do need those underground circles, which are on the forefront. They're pushing the boundaries of this. At the same time, we need to have those middle ground centers that are working the gray zones and trying to decrim legal using, and then the centers like Synthesis, who are like actively legal and went through all the hoops. And then we need the legal centers in the founder countries like Brazil and Peru, that they're the anchors of this whole thing, and it's radiating out from that. I think it's all important.
What are you seeing in terms of COVID preparedness or protocols now? I know that different centers are adopting different protocols in order to reduce harm and disease transmission. But the practices really vary. Some are requiring self-quarantine and testing. Others actually use masks, which I find to be interesting in ayahuasca ceremony. So what are you seeing as the creator of this marketplace? And some other retreat centers and communities are just denying that any of this is happening. So,
Yeah, you just answered it for me. It's everywhere. There's variance across the board. Just like there's variance in the psychedelic industry with standards and safety, there's variance with their relationship to COVID. And, I think that it's just important, if you're looking to do a retreat coming up, you have to fit your risk tolerance. There are also people that just don't care and feel like it's not a thing. And there's people that are very hypervigilant who are very concerned, but yet still want to embark. You have to find the right fit for you. And I'd suggest, find the center that fits your risk tolerance and make sure that you're responsible and take care of yourself. That's essential. But, and do due diligence, like make sure that you don't feel shy about asking and grilling a center why they have the protocols they do, or why don't they have, and if it's not the right fit, don't do it.
Mm-hmm. One of the things that we're seeing with the psychedelic renaissance is the increased mixing of different traditions and practices. And especially, one might refer to that phenomena as being neo-shamanic, where there are providers and retreat organizers that are essentially, maybe they spent some time in Peru, got some training, but then start to create their own thing. And then they're mixing some yoga in it, or maybe Kabbalah, or some other spiritual tradition. What are your thoughts about the mixing of lineages and practices? Because I'm sure you see a lot of it in the marketplace. And, is it safe? Is it good? Is it confusing? Do people like it?
Yeah, right. I think I would answer that from the practitioner's point of view, from the participant's point of view, because I think that's where it really matters. It doesn't really matter as much for me personally. Like, I think that there are many different spiritual lineages, and there are a number of them that are clean, and they're long. They're lineages. The word means line. It goes back to a source. Sometimes they're thousands of years old, and they often have very high integrity. And I think it's really important. We've got shamanic lineages. We've got yoga as a lineage. We have meditation. Within meditation and within yoga, there's many lineages. Within Buddhist meditation, there's Tibetan Buddhist meditation. There's hundreds of lineages, and so I think that it's important to pick one thing, one line, and do it fully. If you're interested in spiritual awakenment, I think that's the path to do it, because there's checks and balances along that line, that there's going to be places where it will be really uncomfortable. ego doesn't want to die, doesn't want to dissolve, and you're going to want to kick out of whatever it is. There's a saying in Buddhism, there's like a snake wiggling into a tube. That's what it's like to connect with the guru and to work on the path. It's, you can't, there's only one way out. And so if you're mixing and matching personally, you run into a danger of the moment it gets difficult, you go, oh, well, I'll just do a little bit of this. And you'll pop out in one. And you can kind of become a spiritual shopper where you put a bunch of things in your basket, you mix and match, and you create your own path. The problem with that is that, you know, there is no true depth. You're kind of skating on the surface, but you're not doing a deep dive. And the deep dive is like peeling an onion. You peel layers and layers off of you, and to a point where it's, you know, it can be incredibly challenging, but you stick through it. So my experience and my advice is to stick with one lineage as a path, whether it's Kriya Yoga, whether it's a shamanic lineage, whether it's, you know, a Tibetan Buddhist path, doesn't matter, but do one thing. If it's a Taoist path, or, you know, but then also there's a lot of help, I find, connecting with other paths. If you have your main path, connecting with other paths help you triangulate, and as like a GPS. You go, I know ayahuasca has done that for me tremendously. As on my Buddhist path, it's like, it's given me ability to have experiences or breakthroughs or what was dry understanding for me in the Buddhist, where I'm reading texts on emptiness or luminous mind. Ayahuasca is like, well, here's the experience. And then I can go, oh, wow, okay, this is really helpful. I now can actually use my meditation understanding and practice, and it helps give context to the experiences in ayahuasca. And the ayahuasca is helping inform meditation, saying, okay, you wanted to know what emptiness was. Well, here it is. And now I can stabilize those practices through, through my daily meditation practice. So I find that using other lineages to help inform and triangulate are really essential, even break through current barriers, but stick to one. So I'm like less concerned about, you know, there's sometimes a hodgepodge. You can go to a ceremony, and this is the globalization. You'll just see, like, you know, my first ceremony I ever did, the first ikaro that was sang was a mantra. And I was like, I'm home. I can trust this, because it was a Buddhist mantra. And I was like, oh, wow, this is what we're, you know, but some might see that as completely sacrilegious. It depends. So, I mean, I would say, you know, you're going to see probably a hodgepodge. We do see a hodgepodge out there by some facilitators. And then there are some that are holding lineages. And I would say, find your practice where you plug in, but connect to an authentic lineage that's been held for, you know, many, many years by authentic teachers, and do that. And then you don't have to worry about what you see. You don't have to worry or judge other teachers who are, you know, doing, if they're presenting a hodgepodge, because you know where you are, and you can be holding to that truth.
I think this is a very interesting exploration. I think it's deeply nuanced as well. Coming also from a Tibetan Buddhist lineage, spent a number of years really immersed in Tibetan Buddhism, in the Nyingma lineage, and then, you know, studying a number of years in the Bön lineage. And so I resonate with what you say about, you know, these lineages are holistic, right? So there are checks and balances to how your ego might want to act out, so to speak. And one of the tricky things around the, how do I put it? Like, I think Chogyam Trungpa talked about this. It was kind of like spiritual materialism, so to speak, where you're kind of like shopping for stuff, right? And I think we also in this past year have seen the dark, the shadow side of that, where there is no checks and balance. So you just end up, you know, having a raging ego instead. You know, anytime it feels uncomfortable, instead of accepting it as a lesson in humility or you know, in no self or whatever that lesson would be within a more traditional holistic context, you just move into something else that makes you and the ego feel good. At the same time, though, there are aspects of tradition that need to be innovated as well. And we also have seen this in the Tibetan Buddhist world. Hmm?
Tradition has never been static. If you look at even just Buddhism, it's innovated, it's constant innovation.
Yeah, exactly. And so, even in the Tibetan Buddhist world, over the last few years, there's been this tremendous Me Too movement that have outed a number of the spiritual leaders, the gurus. And so, I think many of us can agree in this time and day that sexual abuse is not spiritual, and patriarchal displays of power and control are not healthy. But I think too, one of the attributes of this mixing of traditions is in a way kind of a bit like marketing, so to speak. Because I think, especially in the psychedelic space, there may be some lineages that feel closer to their roots. For example, some of the indigenous ways of working with ayahuasca, the Shipibo tradition, for example. And I think, we spiritual materialists of the West, or being in this culture of spiritual materialism, we're always seeking something new and exciting. So when you see something that's kind of like, well, it might be traditional, but it's the Ikaro music is not what I want to dance to. And so then it might be easy, or one might be inclined to go for the hybrid ceremony and find yourself in a novel environment of working with the medicines, or even a mix of medicines. Do you find that you're seeing more mixing of medicines as an attribute of the mixing of spiritual cultures and lineages? Do you see that reflected in your platform?
Well, I want to just get back. I want to answer something else just before I get to that,
Yeah.
about lineage and how the innovation in lineage happens. I think it's essential. I'm thinking about Trungpa Rinpoche, who you just mentioned, who came from Tibet to the West, and he taught the Buddha Dharma here, and he completely innovated. He was a master of innovation, and he understood the Western mind. But he was a master of meditation before. And he brought his lineage, he had mastered it, and he brought it to the West, and then gave it and it allowed it to transform it. And I think that for plant medicines and psychedelics, we need to have a similar movement where the lineage holders that have mastered these medicines and have mastered their relationship with themselves and with the medicines, they need to be the innovators. It's not like a few students went to the East in Tibet and learned a little bit of meditation and then came back and started kind of riffing. And we saw that happen in the 60s, and I don't think it didn't go anywhere. But I think what needs to happen is these also lineage holders, in Peru and in Brazil need to lead, and they need to come and say, okay, this is where this is happening. We're moving towards you here, but we'll hold and we'll shape how this, and they could come and, and some have, but some actually take root in our society, in our cultures, as opposed to us going down there. Eventually I see, to draw another parallel, there were a lot of people in the 60s that were going to India for the teachings, and then the teachings came to the masses. And I think we're in that stage where there's still a number of students going down to the jungle, going down wanting these medicines and teachings, but we're going to need those lineage holders to move to North America and to Europe and to take their seat and then to innovate. And it's they who should be innovating, not the Western students.
But do you think that's really going to happen? When I think about some of the indigenous pages that I know, they've got families in the Amazon, they've got their community. They're not going to move to the global north. They may not even get visas because they're indigenous. So, but they are innovating, though, in their own way, in the sense that, for example, in Brazil, many of the pages have now started to play guitar, and instead of singing their traditional chants in ceremony, they are singing their traditional chants to music and to guitar and melody, and that's a new thing. And so there's this discussion as to whether that's proper or not, but that is an innovation.
I'm happy to hear that and see that. That's cool.
Yeah. I do question whether or not they would actually relocate and move to Europe or the
Maybe,
United
maybe
States. They are visiting more.
yeah, and that's enough. Like the visiting more, I think, is like the relocation in Tibet and Buddhism. Well, they were forced. China invaded
Yes.
Tibet.
Mm-hmm.
So it was like blowing on a dandelion, right? Whew, it all just spread everywhere. But here, maybe it's a series of student lineages that are holding it and coming in, or it's a series of visits. But regardless, I guess the point I want to make is that it needs to be the lineage holder that makes the decisions on how to innovate and transform. As opposed to maybe some of the earlier students saying, okay, I'll be really confident and take this back and change it up. It's like maybe you don't have the whole thing yet and you're innovating without holding.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. What do you see to be the future of the psychedelic retreat industry based on what you're seeing now, like the dynamic of growth and the evolution? Do you see where this is going, and what does it look like to you?
I don't see where it's going, but I can see some things happen. I can say some things that I'd love to happen. I don't have a crystal ball, but I can see a couple of things come to mind. One is that tech is going to get more involved. Our ability to measure transformation is going to increase, and I'm starting to see that happen a little bit. IONS is working, with people to be able to measure the transformation of retreat. We're also seeing, with Michael Pollan's book, the fMRIs come out where you can see wow, this is your brain, this is psilocybin activated brain, and the default mode network, and how I think that we're just on the very nascent stages of that. We're going to, some retreat centers have like tech enhanced experiences where they have like, sort of lower level fMRIs, lower level brain, like Muse, but on steroids. I don't know if you know the Muse for meditations, this little, well, they have more advanced versions of those where people can then track neural activity while working with psychedelics. So I think we're going to start to see tech come in more to measure brain activity, but also to measure transformation. Ultimately, I think that's what we're all looking for, is transformation. And I think you're going to see, it's the West. We love technology. Of course, it's going to show up in the psychedelic space. It's like it already is. And then something else I would like to see more, and that we're going to be an active participant in, is right now when you go on a retreat, it's kind of a solo journey. You connect with the center, you're by yourself, you do your own work, you preparation work, you go in, you do the ceremony, you do the retreat, there's a collective experience, and then you kind of go home. And I want to see that held more in a group setting, so that when people before they come to a retreat, they're actually already connected into the cohort that they're going to be doing the retreat with. And they meet with them online and they exchange, they get to know each other. There's a sense of trust and vulnerability that's created before the retreat. And then during the retreat, you walk in, imagine, you're like, oh, actually I've been meeting, this is my crew. I've met with these people online for months before, or for weeks before. And then, so you can imagine how much more powerful that experience will be when you can let your guard down and you're in a circle of trust. And then likewise with the integration, I thought it's held in a cohort. So I see community being a much more important piece. We're kind of in lone wolf territory right now. And I see that we're going to leverage communities and leverage tech to create communities. And I think COVID's an accelerant of that. This summit is online, and we're starting to realize that we actually can be vulnerable with each other online. We can create sacred space and feel that and let our guard down online. And I think we can leverage that. We will be leveraging that in the future on bookends for in-person experiences. So we can really feel like a sangha and a community.
Mm-hmm. Wonderful. Well, thank you so much. We're at the end of our time together. I really appreciate your insight and your thoughts about how we might be able to, find the right psychedelic retreat for us, and just to know, what's happening in the world, and the tremendous interest. How can the folks in the audience best stay in touch with you, learn more about the kinds of offerings that you have, and check out your the up and coming retreats?
Well, you can go to the website retreat.guru. And then if you want to chat with me personally, you can find me on LinkedIn.
All right, I'll
Simple.
put those links down below this video.
Yeah.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it. You have a beautiful rest of your day in Canada, and look forward to the day that comes when we might be able to meet in person again.
Won't that be lovely? Let's, let's
Oh.
yeah.
Right, bye-bye.
Yeah.